A warm welcome to everyone who is with us this morning. Today's session is entitled Preparing for Unexpected Life Transitions, and this event is part of our Conversations with Leaders series. Before I would get any further into the event, though, I would like, on behalf of those of us who live and work and play in Ottawa, to acknowledge that we are located in the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We work here and we pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. As Paula indicated, my name is Charles Barrett. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of Compassionate Ottawa, and this is one of a series of webinars that we organize on a regular basis to explore various aspects related to the concept of compassionate communities. So just a little bit about our organization. Compassionate Ottawa is a registered charity. We began in 2016 as a citizen-led movement. We use evidence-based approaches to help to change the way we collectively think about wellness, death, loss, grief, and caring for each other. All of our events are offered at no charge. We fund ourselves through donations from individuals and organizations and through grants. So Compassionate Ottawa is all about public education. We provide leadership and inspiration to promote and strengthen a new social model in which all members of our communities would collectively assume responsibility for caring for one another. And to this end, Compassionate Ottawa engages, educates, facilitates conversations that normalize life transitions and end-of-life experiences. We work to strengthen natural health networks in diverse communities. We encourage community participation and action, and we work in partnership with other key stakeholders, including those in the public health and social services systems. I've been a volunteer at Compassionate Ottawa since 2018. By profession, I'm a retired economist. I'm an active volunteer in several organizations in the city, and I'm married to my partner, Linda. We've been married for 45 years. We have 2 daughters, 2 sons-in-law, and 4 grandchildren. So our guest this morning is Marc Séguin. And Marc, would you like to turn your camera on, please? And Marc is actually also a Compassionate Ottawa volunteer, so he's not unknown to us. In fact, he's a good friend. And he is the author of Advocacy and Aging, which is a book about estate and healthcare planning and it's meant for the living years. Marc has helped many families, including his own, plan for and deal with the inevitable changes that are associated with life transitions and with aging. These experiences have enabled him to crystallize an approach in everyday language to maintain continuity in financial affairs and personal care. Marc is a father of 3, a grandfather of 2, and he's been married to his wife of 38 years, and he also is an avid skier who loves the outdoors. So welcome, Marc.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Paula, and the whole Compassion organization. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's also a pleasure to volunteer on an ongoing basis. So a great organization. And for sure, I really sign up to all of the good things that we strive for in this organization.
Well, let's begin our chat. And so, Marc, you're an author. You've written a book that is complete but concise about the changing nature of life as we go through the journey of life. And so the obvious question to begin with is, what prompted you to do so? Why did you choose to write this book?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, especially that I don't think as a core skill, writing was not where my skill set was. My school grade teacher would be quite surprised that I wrote a book. As a matter of fact, I was more a scientist and mathematician at my roots. But there was a number of factors through the last 15 to 20 years that really triggered me to eventually write a book. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to go through 3 or 4 of them. So the first probably initial trigger was uh, living through my father-in-law's aging years. He retired at a fairly early age of 58, and he was always passionate about financials and estate planning. And when he retired, he did a whole lot of reading, and I know he did a lot of planning for himself, talked to certain extent to some of us, but in hindsight, he never planned to lose his mind. And when he started losing his mind, we were all familiar that, there was some degradation there. Uh, it was our first experience with dementia and Alzheimer. But as he was losing his mind in the name of retaining control, he started making changes. And some of the changes could have been detrimental. Eventually, there was one particular change where he sold a certain asset for 5 cents on the dollar in the name of not bothering the family and simplifying things, and that's when we got involved, and we realized that he had actually changed quite a bit on his own investment and estate plan, and he actually made a change to his will. Luckily, we intercepted at the right time. He was receptive, and there was not too much damage. I could tell you many stories that are not the cases. So that was the real eye opener, and I kind of said, well, what do you do to plan for losing your mind or for a situation where you lose control? So that got me thinking. The next trigger was an opportunity to get involved in my own parents' plan. In that case, I was more worried about longevity. My parents were living a very active life, and they were in their mid 80s and still bopping around, being busy, very social life. And I was very worried about longevity. And I said, what if you live for a long time? Have you planned for all, not only on the financial side, but on the care side, what may happen? So, and through that experience of getting involved early, well, early enough, because I do promote getting involved much earlier than the mid 80s, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of best practices, and I learned a lot about how to communicate and how to engage my parents. So that was an eye opener. And then came the time, says, well, okay, so out of this, I'm really learning that the reality is now that we're living longer, we're going to have degraded capabilities. So how do I plan for that? How do I plan for the fact that I may lose my cognitive skills or certain other abilities? And through my own journey, I found out that some of the practices in our financial world, in our legal world, in our healthcare world, are either incomplete or outdated for the real need that's coming. So as I plan my own, I started putting in place certain things that were, I don't think out of the way from normal practices you hear, but a little bit more thorough. And through that, to develop a framework. I was chatting with I'm in the sandwich generation, so chatting with friends that dealing with their parents or their children and so on. And there was a lot of interest, and there was a number of triggers. I won't go through details, but I did get mentored by another book author that really encouraged me to do it. And all of a sudden I said, well, I got to do this. And there was a trigger one day, and I said, if I don't do this, I'm a coward. So I ended up writing the book. So that's a bit of how I got involved. And ever since, I continue my journey of learning throughout the process, and I become more and more dedicated and passionate to share these learning and this passion and wisdom that I've gained through the years.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I must say, I can relate to that. And I bet you everybody who's taking part in our session this morning can as well. As I reach toward the end of my 8th decade and think about it, I mean, life is always changing in ways that we can't predict. We have some very good friends who are dealing with early onset Alzheimer's. Others deal with other kinds of health issues. I mean, the basic point that nobody has a crystal ball seems absolutely critical here, but something that people don't tend to internalize, I think.
Yeah, and it's a reality, and some of us don't like to hear about that. Then, through the process, in the end, I was trying to plan for every circumstance, and in the end, I just made a basic assumption that we will have degraded capabilities at one point. And, I'm the first to admit, and once that I'm not as sharp as I was 10 years ago, and my kids are probably at their prime in terms of abilities. So why wouldn't I get them involved? it's a bit counter to the prior generation or old school that says, oh, you don't talk about money, you don't talk about your health cares and your bobos to your family. But I actually turned around and say, no, actually, you have to build a team around you, a team of advocates that will be there to support you, that want to be there to support you when the time comes.
I think we're sort of fighting some well entrenched cultural assumptions here. One of the things that has struck me is that every single piece of marketing I've ever seen aimed at seniors always seems to be targeted to the active phase of retirement. You know, the couple in tennis whites with tennis rackets. I mean, whether it's selling a condo or selling a retirement residence or travel or a financial product, that always seems to be the picture of retirement. But of
Yeah,
course, that's the whole
that's
story.
that's a true observation. Never really thought about it that way, but that's a reality. In fact, part of my one of the things, and even in terms of financial planning, that I early recognized is that uh, there's phases even in retirement. I mean, there's a phase where you retire, you're active, you want to participate in all the, these opportunities that you always wish you had the time to do. Um, but historically, I think it's proven that after that active phase, there's a bit uh, of a decline of interest. I'd rather stay at home. I will still want to be active, but not as much travel, not as much involvement and so on. And then unfortunately, the last phase is when you start having healthcare degradation and you're not able to do more. So it's interesting to me is that when you look at it, those phases, even from a financial planning, the likelihood is your expenses are a little higher in the early phase, a little they tone down after, and then healthcare goes up. So there's a bit of a U-shaped curve. Now, even in terms of financial planning, you'll see that most people do a straight line, and a straight line curve with a buffer for the end if there's healthcare. That's not always reality. So you need to step back and really look at those realities in various angles. So, and that's kind of what I did for myself and overall, and developed the framework.
One of the things we do at Compassionate Ottawa is to offer workshops on advanced care planning, which is, about how do you determine and appoint an alternative decision maker, and more importantly, how do you convey your hopes and your wishes to that individual. Um, and it's very much not only about the technicalities of the law, but it's about having difficult conversations. So you're familiar with that because you work with us in facilitating those programs, as do I. Um, but in your book, you have a somewhat more comprehensive planning framework that has four parts to it. And I wondered if you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, let me start by saying that advanced care planning became visible to me. I'm going to say around 2016, and the event was I volunteer as a ski patroller at Mont Tremblant, and one of my fellow patrollers arrived in the morning. We arrive earlier before the mountain opens, and I said, "How was your week?" And he basically says, "Well, not quite as what I had planned." Says my dad was in a retirement residence and he had a advanced, well, he called it a healthcare directive. And there was an event, a medical event, and they sent his dad to the hospital. And he says he was not supposed to be sent to the hospital. And I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, we went through this process." And I kept asking, "What's a healthcare directive?" And honestly, it took me years, but it got my attention because I didn't know that the whole concept of go crystallizing your wishes and even eventually documenting them and sharing them, in this case with the residents. So that was my early involvement and awareness of advanced care planning. And like I said, it took me a while to get my hands around it until the day I put my own advanced care plan in place. So all this to say is that in my planning framework, I cover not only the planning on everything that's asset and financially related and so on, but I really talk about how to organize your affair. But then the other fundamental is everything about personal care and healthcare. So in the planning, I think it's incredibly important that we have the full scope of planning, not just focus. And it's interesting, even to this day, most people think that my book is about financial, and it's not. It's holistic. It covers the whole spectrum. So first thing is advanced care planning is important. The second part that's important is communications. So you know, as you know, in our advanced care plan, it's not only the concept of putting a plan together, it's about communicating, sharing, so people understand your wishes and wisdom. And in the case of that I just described of this gentleman that had a plan, obviously he had communicated it not only to his family members, but even to the residents, and it had not been followed. So it demonstrated to me that you never communicate enough, broad enough, and deep enough, and to make sure it's respected. But communication is your only chance to have your wishes and values and benefits respected. Now, let's go back to your original question. What's my planning framework? So I refer to my planning framework as PACT. So basically PACT. So make a pact with yourself, make a pact with your loved one. The P stands for plan. So everyone understands the importance and concept planning. How many people really do it? Not enough. We all know that. The second is then we go into what I don't think people go far enough. So you need to activate your plan. Activate to me means that whatever plan you have, you should be at a moment's notice be able to have other people take over your plan and run it if you've done a good job at sharing a plan and communicating. So I have a concept that was of 24-hour readiness. If something happened to me, so if I walk out of the door and I have an incident, I end up in a coma in the hospital, I expect my wife and or my kids to be able to run my affairs within 24 hours. What does that mean? That means not only they're familiar with my affairs, not only they know where my documents are, they actually know how I run my affairs, what my wishes are. They know if they have to go to the bank, they already pre-approved. They don't need to take the power of attorney to get it approved, which is a very tedious process. So that when you start thinking of that concept of readiness, activation takes a whole other meaning. The C stands for communicate. So this is something we all understand within Compassion to Ottawa, that conversation and communications are the foundation to be able to share your wisdom, your values, your wishes. And so, you know, to me, that's an important, and I will talk a little bit about some of the conversations that I've had with both my parents and our family. And then T is transition. So it's interesting. Recently, I was talking to a cousin, and they're dealing with their mother's dementia. Says, have you transitioned management of finance? And she said, well, no, not yet. But then I asked the question, are you familiar with it? Oh, yeah. Do you have access to the account? Are you following? You're shadowing. So transition is not only a radical, you know, change of who's making decisions and managing. To me, it's a gradual process of getting people aware of your affairs, aware of your wishes, and eventually shadowing you. And eventually at a moment's time when there's a need, is to be able to hand over or have someone take over. So in the end, I'm going to summarize the framework is known as PACT: plan, activate, communicate, and transition. It operates not only on the financial and estate side, but also on the organizing your affairs as well as your healthcare and personal care.
So this really all about contingency and resilience, isn't it? I mean, it's not just a question of a single plan. It's a question of continuous conversation and knowing what if and being ready for when something happens.
Yeah, that's actually a very good way to say it. It's contingency, but being prepared and prepared for the unexpected situation. I honestly, if I had write my book again today, I'd change the title to Advocacy in Unplanned Life Transitions, because you know, originally the trigger was aging. And yes, obviously as you age, because we live longer, the medical system is better, the likelihood of life transitions and multiple types of life transitions and could occur in the aging, but the reality is it could occur anytime. Anyone at any age is vulnerable to an incident or a critical illness where they will need help from the surroundings. So the principle applies for any moment in time as a contingency plan, or as I like to use the word continuity because it's a continuity of what you have put in place for your own self and what's important to you. And so that's really, the foundation of why I got involved, and why I'm actually expanding the scope of who do I want to see apply these framework, and encourage everyone at any age to do more planning, but go beyond just the planning. It's not enough to have a plan. Conversations are important, and being proactive in readiness.
So I'm going to ask you a question that you probably can't answer, and neither can I, but I think I have an educated guess, and that is, if you were to look at the population of Ottawa or the population of Ontario or Canada, where do you think we collectively are on this journey? If the ideal is to be thinking ahead, recognizing that there are twists and turns in life, having contingency plans, where are most people?
Well, I think there are enough statistics out there, not specifically linked to, on my PAC framework, how far you are, but I don't have the exact most recent data, but let's just start by a will. How many people have a will? And I think we're still at a stage where there's 60 to 65% that will have a will. But let's talk about a will that's up to date. If you ask people, how many people have reviewed or updated their will within the last 5 years? Well, you're down to less than 40% of the population. And I'm going to tell you, as you enter your aging years, you need to revisit your will, including because who would be your executor? And I'm going to say will and power of attorney. Just a case in point, my parents had a will when I got involved in mid-80s. And guess what? The will said if my dad dies, or if my dad becomes ill, it would be my mother. And if my mother, then it would be myself and my sister, depending on which power of attorney we're talking about. Well, the reality is, in the mid-80s, my mom was not the best person to go and take over my dad's affair. In fact, she was in early dementia. And luckily, when I got involved with my parents, we got that changed. And it became very important because in her Alzheimer, my mother became very defiant and aggressive. And I could tell you, it could have happened that if I was going to need to take over my dad's affair, my mom would have blocked me, because she was, and unfortunately, it was not my mom. It's the sickness in my mom that would have prohibited the right thing to occur. So luckily, we were able to work that out. But it's very important people revisit their will and the power of attorney, from the assignment of people, the order of assignment, and the rights of the people at what point in time. And in fact, I'm going to say, in the case of power of attorney, you actually need to go one step further and activate it, meaning that you go and invoke it at the bank and tell them, I'm not waiting until I'm sick and it's required. I'm invoking it now to be ready. I know this is not what's been done in the legal profession in general. I'm probably one in less than 5, if not less, 1% of the population that has done that and believes in that. But I'm certainly more and more believing it, and that the activation is important. So that was statistics on just plain wills and power of attorney. As you know, for advanced care planning, we show some statistics in each of our workshop. And the good news is 80% of people have put some thoughts in place. They have thought about what end of life care would be, circumstances. The reality is less than 25% have put an advanced care plan, and less than 40% have had even some basic conversation with close family or friends or whoever would be their delegates. So the bottom line is, we have a long way to go in order to be well prepared as a population for these unplanned life transition or even planned life transition. We know it's going to happen. And one of the things, people say, well, the world's dealt with this for years. What's the impact if you don't have planning? Well, what I'm realizing is, the importance of dignity and your wishes and your values and beliefs to be respected. But what's more concerning to me is I hear too often broken relationships, broken families, family rifts through critical events. Whether in business or in real life, uh, what I found is that the true personality of people reveals itself in periods of change, in periods of crisis. And, families are an interesting entity in that everything works well when we all get together for a family event, whether it's Christmas or Thanksgiving and so on, and everyone's polite at the dinner table. We're all laughing and so on. But it's in crisis that you truly see the personalities. And I think it's much more important that uh, the conversation, a deeper conversation about important subjects such as money, such as finance, such as healthcare, wishes, be had, because it's okay if there are differences of views, but if you bring them together in the end, that as an individual you could see the difference and deal with them through these conversation. In the end, you may choose the right people to represent, or you may equip these people to represent you properly, and that the team around you are all aware of you, and whether they agree or disagree, they will respect your own values and wishes through the process.
I can relate to everything you said, from dusting off a will that my wife and I did early in our marriage as we were near a retirement, and we thought it would be easy to update it, and we were absolutely shocked by what we had forgotten about this from 30 years earlier. And I can relate to the Thanksgiving extended family and succession planning in family businesses and so on. So the question then, to my mind, Mark, is how do you get the conversations going with the stakeholders, particularly your children? We hear a lot about that during our advanced care planning sessions because these are talking about important topics people don't want to talk about. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, as you know, in the workshop, we always talk about find a trigger, find an opportunity. I'm going to say the starting point is that you want to have these conversations. So whether you're a parent that want to start the conversation with your kids or vice versa, or even a friend that you feel it's important to, for one of your friends to have these conversation trigger because you're aware of certain circumstances. So I'm going to give you two examples. I'm going to give you the example of my own parents. So my parents are of the classic old generation. They were very proud of what they've achieved in life. They had a humble life, but very proud, and they have every reason to be. But they never talked to us about money. They did say we have a will. It's in the fire protected box. It's in their closet. And by the way, your sister and you are the executors. So when comes time, that's what you have to do. And so that's as much as we had as information. Personally, I had been involved quickly in a conversation when my dad retired about his pension plan and whether he would provide a death benefit to my mom or get a bigger amount otherwise. So I helped him in that discussion, but that's as much as I have. And honestly, I was somewhat concerned about, the amount of funds they had to last until the reality that they may live past 105. My dad's 98 now, and when they were 87 and 84, when I started getting involved, they were just living the life, and I still don't know how they afforded what they did. So, having said that, I was deep down, I had a concern, didn't know when and how to get involved, but up until that moment event that I'm going to talk to you about, I knew they had a house and it was paid for. And in the worst case, I knew that that would be a buffer. So I had a buffer. However, one cold February Friday night, I got a call from my mother that was very happy to let me know that they had sold their house. And you need to understand they had moved from Montreal to the Laurentians uh, in their later retirement years. I don't know if they freed up money and did it to free up money or it was a lifestyle thing, but the reality is that they were commuting often from Saint Adele and Laurentians to Montreal for concerts and so on through their social life. And I started getting worried about driving it back at night at 11 o'clock. So the sale of the house was something we had encouraged, very positive and so on. However, in the back of my mind was, what are they going to do with the money? Uh, what's the plan if they're moving to the city? It's going to be more expensive to live. If they're moving in retirement home, all those questions kicked in. So I started first by telling them I was happy. I slept overnight. The next day, I decided I need to approach them. So I asked for a meeting. So this was the trigger. I asked to meet them and to express, first of all, ask the question to see how organized or not they were, where their plans were, and to ask to be involved. And sure enough, they welcomed me meeting them. I didn't have any questions. They didn't know where they were going, where they wanted to live, and so on. So I started getting concerned and asked to be involved. My dad was very welcoming. My mom, not so much, to be honest. Well, no, she was, but cautiously. She was very proud of her independence and very private in certain ways. Anyways, eventually they all agreed and we wanted a process. I'm going to tell you, it was a process that took 6 months to put a basic financial plan in place. I could have put a financial plan in place in 2 weeks. The financial advisor already had a plan. He could have put it together, and update it quickly. However, it was not a process of getting a plan. It was a process of working together, really crystallizing their objectives, their wishes, their priorities, all these conversations. And we decided to take our time and to involve their financial advisors as opposed to do it independently. So we did it as a team and we did it over a 6 month period. And I cherish that period of time because not only I happened to be getting to know my parents from a different angle, so new style of relationship. And at the same time, I was able to learn how they run their affairs. And to this day, whenever I do a transaction, and at the end of the month, I just did a few for my parents, I do it the way they do it and how what I learned through the years working with them. So that's one example, and people may have some questions on that one. Let me flip to the other example, which is my own family. So as I got involved in this, I said, I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid, so I'm going to apply what I preach. And so uh, clearly my kids knew that I was passionate about the subject. I had published a book, but I decided to start formalizing family meeting. In fact, I started before this. But there's two things. So the family meeting is something that has become in our family a yearly thing. So it's kind of known. I've given myself 10 years to be as deep and as broad of discussions that I envisage. So again, in the concept of there was, I found the trigger was more natural in the case of our family because I already was involved. But it's not only how do you start the conversation, how do you keep the conversation going, and how deep you go and how broad you go. So, like I said, I've given myself 10 years, and every years I don't make it long, probably an hour and a half. I'm starting to learn some technique to make it fun. At first, it was, oh, dad one has a death talk, right? So, so now, over years, I have different tools that I use to make it a very positive experience. I switch the subjects and the focus, and again, slowly going deeper, and as they become familiar. And like I said, we make it fun. It's now part of the process, and we just don't overdo it. So that's, long answer to simple questions, but you need to first want to do that, believe it's important, and then find a trigger and work at it to find the opportunity, and then take the time that it takes.
And it's very much about establishing and reinforcing trust and respect and understanding people's desire to be independent, and understanding the dynamics between parents and parents and children, which of course changes as you go through the life cycle.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I learn something every year, to be honest with you. But basically, you can't if you don't have conversation on different topics than the day-to-day update of how you're doing, you won't get to know the other people. You won't evolve the relationship where it needs to be. And let's face it, the topics we're speaking about are very important and sometimes very sensitive and very personal, and not everyone's comfortable to talk about certain things. So the trust and taking your time and building it and is critical.
Well, selling the family house is a sensitive topic for many people because it's tied into independence as well as life memories and so on. But there are a whole bunch of other topics I think that are equally important and equally sensitive, and you discuss some of those in your book as well. Driving a car, for example.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. That's a very specific topic, but driving the car is something that has become to me a very important topic and subject because when you're 16, 17, or 18, you acquire your driver's license. It's almost your first official recognized sign that you have matured enough to be an independent adult, and so on and so forth. And it provides you flexibility in life, or it virtually provides you flexibility. People think that the only mode of transportation is your own car, and they think that anything else is too expensive, at least in the old school. And the reality is your abilities, driving a car is a big responsibility. And we forget the responsibility. It's not only your ability to get from A to B, but it's the safety that you make sure that you respect for everyone that's around. So, and with age and degradation, you lose that those abilities, certain abilities, and people want to hang around on it for too long. And it's a subject that I know I'm not going to win. I have a friend that basically recently said, "Oh, my mom's still great. She's driving at 92," and I feel like saying, "How sharp is she?" But the key question is, would you let your mom drive your grandchildren to an event? And that's when it gets closer to home, because people think it's all right for granddad to go and drive and hit a ding in the parking, or hit a post, or hit the curb and damage his wheels. But if you ask the question, what if this time granddad hit his granddaughter that is walking the baby, the newly born baby, because they live around the corner and there's an accident? Well, that's when you really realize the responsibility that we all have when we drive a car. And we should all be honest to ourselves and surround yourself with people that will protect you and be there to help you in the transition. And it's a hard subject. It's a really, really difficult subject, but it's a subject I insist that is taken seriously, because I've seen one case is too many of an accident that shouldn't have occurred. So anyway, so that's one of the specific subject that it's in my book, among others that we could confront. I've already opened the conversation with my children, and basically in our family meeting, I didn't dwell on it, but I basically says, the day your mom or I, you don't feel that we should be driving, please, please, let's have the open conversation, and just know where my worries stand today, while I'm, more alert and conscious about this topic.
I think another example, which is kind of central to advanced care planning, is the power of attorney for for personal care, and the whole question of alternative decision makers, and because that again, that is a challenge both for the people giving the power of attorney, but also for the people who have the responsibility. Um, any thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is being a delegate on a power of attorney,
Yeah.
being the attorney either uh, for assets or the management of assets and goods or care is a job.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a big job. Okay, for my parents, I am the one that manages the assets, financial side, and my sister. And I could tell you, my sister is almost, at least for a period of time, it was almost a full-time job. And people in an early stage, when you say, "Well, who do you want to assign?" and people think it's just an honor, or this is the favorite son or the favorite daughter or whatever. It should not be, and it's absolutely not that. Uh, it's work. It's work being an attorney under either power of attorney for care and the same thing being an executor. And it requires skills, it requires interest, it requires time. And I'm going to say in the context of healthcare and personal care, it requires a really special person. I'll be honest, I have compassion and I care about my parents, and so I couldn't do what my sister does. I mean, she's an angel sent from God. It takes a very special person, and it should take a lot of time. And it could be the same thing on the financial side, depending on the level of complexity. So I think it's very, very important that people carefully select and think through who are those people, number one. Uh, Constantly review it because circumstance could change. And then go beyond just one person. I know that in the law, for instance, in Ontario, we talk about a substitute decision maker for care, but really you should surround yourself with a team, okay? And it could be the rest of the family that's all aligned that will share the load, or it could be friends and so on. In my book, one of the concept is not only being ready and planning and so on, but it's also uh, the major tagline is build your team. Build your team for those life transition. And in my book, I know the overall concept is packed, but there's 5 pillars, and I also talk about 5 teams, and the 5 teams or 5 sub-teams, and obviously your core team, which is the people you've delegated in your power of attorney and will, your advisors, whether it's financial or real estate or social work or healthcare advisors. Then you have your friends and family, the broader friends and family. Then there's the healthcare team. As for instance, my own doctor has a copy of my healthcare directive. They're already aware of big part of my advanced care plan. So should something happen, and as we grow older, there are many more healthcare providers that are around us. So how do you advise them? And then there's your community. I call the extended team. Could be the trades that are working in your house. If you need home care, you have members of the associations or social groups you'd be part. You'd be surprised, but you need to nurture those teams around you. So it's not as simple as got a will and name a person or have a power of attorney. A lot of care needs to be taken and proactive action to nurture that team. Again, to help you through those life transitions.
Well, your last point really gets to the heart of the concept of a compassionate community, doesn't it? Because it's talking about networks of support, which will range from your immediate family to many other people.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I still have my mother's words resonate. We're independent. We don't need your help. We don't, you guys are flying your own wings. We're proud. The reality is people want to help. We want to be there. The children want to be there for their parents the same way the parents were there for the children. We were younger. Friends and neighbor want to help. Yesterday I was at my cottage to check on things, and unfortunately my neighbor has had some critical illness, is in the hospital, and I know they always check on our place. And while for sure I wanted to be there and reassure them that the heat is on, everything's okay at the home, and so on and so forth. So that's what it's all about. And people want to help, and we need to recognize that and nurture that, not abuse it, nurture it to a point that, at the right moment in time, people will get involved at the right level.
People have to learn how to ask for help, and people also need to learn how to inquire about what help is needed. And so there's some skills there on, both sides of that, aren't there?
Yeah, well, my neighbor's lucky to have a good wife because he never looks for help, and she is pretty welcoming of that help. So,
Now speaking of the cottage, another classic source of challenge and in some cases conflict in families is about planning the succession of the cottage, particularly with capital gains taxes.
well, yes, and this is a subject dear to my heart. Unfortunately, our family has gone through a pretty difficult situation around a cottage transition. Actually, I've been through a number of cottage transition on both sides of families, my own, my parents, and so on. And it was interesting because when I wrote the book, I was not going to write about that subject because I'm not sure what I could bring to the table at that moment in time. And I know, and I've read a whole lot about cottage transition, and a lot of it is focused around financials. People talk about worry about the capital gains. If you have enough means, get it in the trust. If you transition, so on. And I have to step back and think about my own experience and think about a lot of what I've read because I read a lot. And I've ended up developing a mini framework on the topic. And it all comes back down again towards conversation and clear dialogue within the families. And the first topic that needs to be discussed and recognized is, first of all, can we afford to transition the cottage? If you have a proper financial plan, you should be able to take all of your net worth, your estate, and basically allocate it in three categories. Here's what I need to live, typically till the age of 90. These days, some people are doing a plan to 95. So let's assume you want to live on 70,000 or 100,000 or 50,000 a year, whatever in the number or more. You need a plan that says, out of my estate, this is what I need. Then people always worry about not having enough. They're always worried about money. Listen, we grow up, and as an adult, we're taught to live on your own means, and you have to accumulate that. And we were always worried about not having enough. Well, if you have a plan that says this is what I need to live to the age of 90. Here are my contingency. In the case of my parents, it was what if they live beyond the planning scope? Or what if they have extreme expensive in a retirement home with assisted living and so on. We know how much that is. And then there's the third allotment is what you never need. So this is money that, and no one ever talks about that. I've not seen many financial planners summarize a plan and tell you, you will never need that money. So now you could talk proactively about gifting while alive, whether it's a pre-inheritance to your children or getting involved in nonprofit organization and so on and so forth. And then you could discuss, well, I have this. Do I want to put more money in my lifestyle, more money in my protection, or shift it around? But I'm coming back to the cottage. Your cottage belongs somewhere in that allotment. So people that don't have a lot of means will need the proceeds of the cottage to keep their lifestyle going till a certain age. Okay. Or they will need it for protection, or in some cases, so on. So too often, I think I hear discussion is how do we transition to the kids? But no one's asked the conversation, can we afford to transition to the kids? So I think the first reality starts with the cottage is to first recognize whether the cottage belong into I need the proceeds to continue my lifestyle and my priority, or I'll need as a protection. So we're not talking transition. If it's in the other category, then it's different discussion. So that to me is the first realization, and that needs to be openly dialogued with the family, because too often the kids assume they will inherit and should have the cottage because there's emotional attachment. So that's the first kind of thought process that I put into the framework. The other process is to dialogue of what's your true interest. It's very easy when mom and dad are paying all expenses, when they welcome you to the cottage and so on. But if you kind of say, now you own it, or you own it with your brother, how do you see that work? And no one puts themselves where it says it's going to work out and so on. But I have seen too many circumstances where the true interests of people don't come out at any given point in time. So I could go on, but fundamentally, I think there's an affordability dimension, there's an interest and need dimension, and what I will say in simple terms is that it needs to be done around fair market value. A lot. So if you have a cottage, I'm just going to take a round figures. Cottage has gone up in prices around here. So let's assume you have a cottage that's worth $400,000. Well, the dialogue need to be with whoever may be interested is, okay, so if you're interested, you will acquire this cottage for 400,000, or you and your brother will acquire this for 400,000, or so on. And when you put that dollar figure, people's needs and interests manifest themselves differently. And whether it's a true transfer or payment of 400,000, or whether it will be done through a mechanism, trust, and so on, it doesn't really matter. But people need to realize that fundamentally, if you're assuming that you will want and take over the cottage, you're doing it at fair market value, and because you're really foregoing. If you sold the cottage, you would have that in the inheritance, so you might as well think that way. So it's an opportunity cost. So bottom line, it comes down to I find too many people think of secondary property transition as a tax scheme, a capital gain avoidance, financial planning, trust planning, or so on. To me, it's more important to have the basic conversation about affordability, interest at fair market value.
And capacity. Mark, I think that's an example of a sort of a larger theme here, namely that financial planning is not a linear exercise either. It is profoundly affected by the twists and turns of life and changing circumstances. And therefore, too, that really sort of reinforces the fact that you need to be rethinking wills and bequests as circumstances change, because there could be major impacts of life events. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I could talk a lot about financial planning and estate planning, and not in a very deep way. I find that even in the financial community and financial planning community, the big focus is on tax and investment.
Yeah.
Okay. But really, a proper financial plan includes taxes, includes investment, but it includes budgeting, it includes life objectives, it includes a whole bunch of other things. And in the end, if you do have a proper financial plan, I recognize a financial plan by being able to see it summarized on one slide. And with those three allotments. So this is how much my net worth is, this is how much I need to live, here's my protection, so on. And it should be simple and clear enough to be able to have easy communications, even with people that are not financially literate or interested in financial. And I'm going to tell you, when I told you about the process I went with my parents, it was a 6-month process. I made sure that through that process, my mom, which was not as much financially astute and interested in the subject, but also in hindsight was going through early dementia, we made sure that, as well as my dad, which was not big on investment either, he was good budgeting and cash flow management, we made sure that everyone understood every step of the way that we could summarize. And in the end, there was a one slide that was easy to understand the plan, and there was no question. And to this day, it's still my benchmark of how I do things. But all this to say, is that a financial plan that is complete and summarized properly will be easy to understand, easy to transition, and easy to bring everyone on board and align more than just the person responsible to managing it. So that's number one subject that you brought up in your question. You talked about changing circumstances in life and so on. And one of the uh, one of the realities that we are facing more in a modern society is that a lot of people uh, don't have a pension, a traditionally funded pension where every month you get an amount of money. Now in Ottawa, there's probably more that have it because we're still a government town, but that's a new reality. And I want to talk about that reality, to talk about how circumstances could change. So, um, if you have a self-managed pension, which is actually my case, you've had to accumulated some amount of money in your RSPs and your TFSAs and probably outside to maintain your lifestyle until the age of 90. Well, uh, that's all good. You got a plan to 90, you have your buffers, as I said, and you may have extra. What if both my wife and I die in an accident next year, or in 5 years, or in 10 years? Well, I'm going to tell you, with that new reality, there is a substantial estate and a substantial inheritance to my kids. And honestly, probably more than I would think. In fact, my plan is there won't be much by the time I'm 90, and that's what the expectation of my kids. So all of a sudden, it's a different situation. So you got to start thinking about it's a concept that I'm starting to evolve of a staggered will. What's your wishes if you die in 5 year, 10 year, 20 years, and so on. And when you start thinking about that, you'll find out that you may have open up dialogues. So I talked about my family meeting, and that is one of the subject that's on the agenda for one of my next family meeting. It's their views about nonprofit organization. And it's opening the dialogue to get to know them on that dimension a little bit more, but also to start uh, evolving my wishes in a staggered way, because certainly if I had to pass away in the next year, there'd be a lot of organization I would like to give to and do a bequest gift. So those are different circumstances. I'm going to say, as another example, the same thing in my parents. We had an open conversation about their wishes with respect to inheritance. And like I said, they had a humble life. And they said, well, you guys are flying by your own wings, and we gave you everything. Yeah. And then there was, would like to give you a little bit and so on. But because we've done a better job at managing through the plan that we put in place, there's probably more. Unfortunately, I don't have the opportunity to have the discussion of planned giving. My mom passed away 2 years ago, and my dad is not at a point in time where I feel that is sane enough. Maybe that's not the right word, but he's not capable enough to have that discussion. So I can't change the wishes that are already expressed in his will and in our past conversation.
I'm going to, I've saved what I think is one of the most challenging topics for last, and that is medical assistance in dying, which of course has become accepted in Canada, but it's still a sensitive topic because people see it differently, partners see it differently, children see it differently. How do you think that should be addressed as part of this planning process?
Well, thank you for bringing it up. I know it's a subject that a lot of people don't like to talk about. Some people do like to talk about. It's a subject that I've paid quite a bit of interest over the last 10 years. So as you pointed out, MAID is a reality in Canada. It's an option, and different people have different views over this. So the first thing I'm going to say is I personally feel that it's an integral part of any advanced care planning. So your wishes, your values, and belief around anything that could happen to you around your healthcare should be part of your thought process of crystallizing your views. I'm going to say that for most people, crystallizing their own views is probably the biggest challenge is any advanced care planning. And I've had some dialogue with people. Well, what if you had a heart attack right now? What are your wishes? Well, they say this was, and I've heard some people, a lot of would say the one-liner, do not resuscitate. Well, what does that mean? Okay, we're playing golf and I'm a first responder and I sense that you're having a heart attack. Do you want me not to do CPR on you? I'm trained to do it. I'm legally forced to do it. But if your wishes weren't, you'd put me in a hard spot, but I may respect your wishes. Well, no, 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 no. I didn't mean that. I mean, you go to hospital and then, well, you said you were do not resuscitate and now. So for most people, getting some crystallization of their own wishes is difficult, even in the simple case of transfusion, diabetes, name all the illnesses and name all the treatment that you may think about. Bring MAID in, it's that much more difficult and emotional. Now, for some people, there's some black and white answer either way, but most people, I would say, fall within a gray zone. And so I think it's important to crystallize your own wishes, first and foremost, around the topic. Secondly, I think that when you're ready, I think it's an important topic to open up with your entourage. You'll find out that not all members of your family may be aligned with you. And that would cause problem come the day. And so I think it's, again, first, crystallize your own, start aligning the process with people around. And, in the end, in certain circumstances, you may actually have to change who you've assigned as your power of attorney if there's a difference of opinion and this person feels so strongly about their values that they cannot respect your own. So that's important, especially for those that are polarized on one or the other around MAID. So I think it's important. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm sure that maybe other people will have some questions. I think it's important to educate yourself on the topic. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of bad communications through social media. Even the press seems to favor one end or another. Um, I've I've read enough books. I've read enough webinars by experts. I've now known in my environment of people whose families have gone through it. So I think education yourself so that you really understand the true reality of the topic is important. And the last thing I'm going to say related to education is uh, there's a lot of subtle things within the law that are not fully understood. And in particular, there's one recently that made visible to me is the waiver of last consent. There's a lot of people that are not aware of that. That applies for people that are in a process of cognitive skills like dementia. Even if we don't have the advance request that's been in law and now in Quebec for the last 3 months, there are ways to make a choice of MAID even with dementia, even outside Quebec right now. And that's just one example. I mean, there's some sensitive subjects around disabilities and misconceptions as well, and so on. So the subject is you need to crystallize your own views, share them, but also get educated. And I'm going to say a last little comment. Don't assume that your healthcare providers are also educated in the topic. I was stunned to be at a palliative care conference, and one doctor, a palliative care doctor, was honest enough to tell me that the people that come and see them seem to be more educated and informed than they are trained. So it's an evolving world right now, and it's not an easy word to maneuver yourself, but because it's a choice, it's a reality in Canada. I think options are an opportunity. So uh, please don't ignore it and make your own wishes crystallize and known.
It strikes me, Mark, that you can generalize the point about education around MAID to education around uh, medicine and the limits of medicine at the end of life. I mean, you alluded to a do not resuscitate order, and I guess people understand really what you know, resuscitation may entail, and but it seems to me that I mean, I have examples of friends of ours who had done all the planning for the end of life, but in fact were shocked by what actually transpired in the emergency room when it happened, because you can't be completely
Oh,
prepared for.
absolutely. And in fact, it's I personally think that MAID has brought a lot of visibility to palliative care, and people are learning more about palliative care. And
Yeah,
then once you learn more about palliative care and its values, then you start recognizing how palliative care is not only about the last 5 or 10 days, it could be applied uh, years before, and it has some whole bunch of benefits. And then you find out about, okay, so it's not palliative care. Then you find out about treatments of many things. So in general, and I look at my own parents, they really didn't understand a whole lot about all kinds of medical treatment. Even dementia, they had a lot of people going through dementia, and they just think, oh, they're just old, and people are, they're just getting older and so on, and they didn't fully appreciate. I'll give you one example that's simple, but even about basic life resuscitation. I'm a trained first responder, and I do know that if I do CPR, I will likely break someone's ribs and cracks. And so I've had a discussion with my dad. Okay, so should you have a symptoms of a heart attack, do you want me to do CPR on you? And I said, well, he said, what do you mean? How does that work? And I said, well, of course, if it's mild. I said, well, first of all, I don't know it's mild, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to break your wrist, and you're frail and 90 some years old. I'm not sure it's the right thing. So but even those basic concepts are not understood in terms of healthcare. So I think we owe it to ourselves as a population is to educate ourselves. And then once you enter an advanced care planning process, yeah, we could start with end of life, but we could also start with your reality today and what should these circumstances occur, and grab examples of people around in your life and what they've gone through and how would you react. But it's all about starting the conversation and helping people through the process of crystallizing their wishes.
Mark, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to give us some opportunity for the question period. And it is, I'm looking at the cover of your book and looking at that 5-line logo on it, which is very intriguing. Is there a story behind that?
I'm really glad you asked, because very few people ask. Actually, when I first published the book, a few friends said, "Oh, this is a really nice logo," and some of them got it, and some of them asked me some questions. But I'm going to say the first thing is uh, when I first got into the subject, I felt that it was a negative subject. People, you talk about death, you talk about illness, you talk about degraded capability and how to manage when you're not as competent and capable. I felt it was bleak, and I said, I need to flip that around. It needs to be something positive. It needs that the planning will give you peace of mind, will allow you to live fully with the greatest qualities. So it was hard to move, but the first aspect was I do have 5 pillars in my book, and I talk about 5 sub-themes. So there are 5 lines, and the lines are crooked because the planning's up and down and it's uncoordinated. But eventually, the purpose of the book is to converge and have one holistic plan that is coherent and from which you could have a base conversation with it. So that's the fundamental basics about the lines. The colors are very interesting. I didn't know much more about colors. I didn't study psychology or all these good world of theories that know about subconscious things, but I did learn a little bit of what colors. But the blue, the navy blue, represent trust. We talked about trust earlier and the importance of trust. The teal represent calm. So we have to have peace of mind and calm in our life. The light blue represents being organized. So it's a subconscious, but it's about organization. I didn't spend much time today talking about how important it is to get your affairs organized, simplified, documented in order to facilitate transition. The yellow is about happiness, so it brings it alive. And it's funny, but when you see bright color, we seem to feel much better. And the orange is about enthusiasm. And I think hopefully you guys sense my passion and enthusiasm around the subject. And I think we need to be. So that's a quick summary of what's behind that logo.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. And I think it's nice to end on a positive note, which I think is appropriate. And I've enjoyed our conversation very much. I'm going to give you a moment to catch our breath and turn things over to Paula to see if we have questions. I'm sure we do. And then following the question and answer period, I'll have a few concluding remarks to end the session. So,
well, thank you. It was a great conversation, great leadership, and yourself, I know, have a lot of experience. So thank you for sharing at the same time.
Well, thank you to you, Mark and Charles, for having this discussion and for everyone joining us today. We do have quite a few questions that have been submitted, so we'll go through as many as we can in the time that we have available. And the first one that came up many times, Mark, is where can your book, Advocacy and Aging, be purchased?
Oh, thank you for asking the question. It was not the goal to sell the book, but I'm always happy to share my learnings through the book. You could find it on my own website. So it's advocacyandaging.com. And you could buy it directly through there. And you do have, and maybe you want to share on the chat, my email and as well as my phone number. I'm happy to have open conversation. The email and the phone is on the website as well as in the book. But if you have difficulty, you could reach out if you could put those coordinates in the chat line.
Sure, definitely. So the website address is in the chat box now, as well as your email. The next question asks, for your annual meeting that you have with your family, do you go in with an agenda of topics that you want to cover, or is it more free-flowing?
There is definitely an agenda, and I tried to pick a topic. In fact, my wife and I will sit together and say, okay, what would you like to do and what should we achieve in terms of depth and breadth? So for instance, I'm going to grab this year's example. So in the first year, we actually expose, here's our wills, here's our power of attorney, here's our healthcare directive. Here's who's assigned for what, and have an open discussion so they understood the basic documentation and didn't go much more into details in that. The second or third year, we went into healthcare directive and had them guess a little bit of, in this circumstance, what treatment would we want or whatever. Anyway, so we kind of make sure that we're covering all the subjects at a broad level and start going deep. I'm going to share what I did this year because I think it was quite interesting. So I decided I needed to go deeper. And so we wanted to go a little deeper, but we also wanted to get some hands-on and go into the document. So we went through a scenario, and I'm going to tell you the scenario, and you're going to find it pretty bleak. The scenario was the following. Mom and dad just had a car accident. Dad passed away, and they're asking you what to do with the body. Mom's in this hospital. She's intubated. And it turns out that the accident was caused by a mild heart attack. And they now want to do an operation. They want to put a pacemaker. They need to do a blood transfusion. And there was something else. And by the way, it's the end of the month. And the mortgage on the rental property is due. And the revenues should be coming in that will help cover the mortgage and so on. What do you do? So that was a scenario. And it's pretty bleak, as you could tell. But you could see there were some decisions made on the funeral arrangements and what to do with the body. There was healthcare decision, who's the substitute decision maker, what are our wishes. And there was some, how do you find out where the affairs are organized? And if you remember, my benchmark is within 24 hours, you should be able to operate my affairs. Anyways, that's what we did. And we didn't have them go to the safe or where the documents, we brought the documents there and let's see, what do you do? And we let them do. You could ask some more questions, but in summary, it was interesting because they started working together. Well, the funeral arrangement, there must be somewhere in this organizer that that's put together. We need to know whether he wants to be cremated or whatever, cremated or whatever. So there was that, and then your mom had a healthcare directive, so we need to go there. There's some categories. They had they remembered mild versus mid versus severe heart attack. So they start dialoguing, working together, but it forced them to not only know there was some document, but what are those documents? So that's kind of what we did. So the answer to your question is yes, we come in with an agenda. Yes, we try to have a specific topic. Yes, we try to stay within not too long. And we are trying to find techniques to make it fun, even in these bleak scenarios. I'll just make an aside. As much as it sounded like a bleak scenario, one of the friends of the family, their children, his in-laws, had a car accident with a similar impact. One of the two were in a hospital. One was severely in hospital with difficult decision, life-threatening injuries, and the other was in the hospital for a week with other injuries. So that scenario that appeared unrealistic, maybe at the moment in time for my kids, happen to some close friends of the family. Not exactly, but similar. So when I talk about unplanned life transition, it's real. So just hopefully that answered the question and brought some new perspective at the same time.
Thank you. And the next person says or asks, how do I overcome my discomfort of engaging my children's partners in these important discussions?
Oh, there's no black and white answer because there's all kinds of family dynamics that are involved. So every circumstance is different. I'm going to give you two different circumstances. In my case, I involve my daughter-in-law. We only have one in-law and my children, but from the get-go, and that just reflects the state of the relationships. It's not always possible, and this is something that you either have to accept or nurture. I'm going to give you the other end of the spectrum. As much as I said openly of all the best practice we did with my parents' wishes, and I understand them, and I appreciate them, as well as I know the dynamic within our family are such that we didn't openly share everything. And I was actually confronted a year or two ago with that question, and I went back to my dad, and my sibling had asked for some financial information to be shared, and I went back to my dad. My reflex was to openly share. I went back to my dad. He said, "No, we don't need to do that for a positive reason." So, unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a black and white answer, but I'm going to first suggest that you need to recognize the situation as it is. You need to recognize whether your discomfort is due to a real situation or your own, are you going to use quirks? And then decide whether over time you could evolve. But again, it's a question of take the time as required.
Thank you, Marc. The next question asks, what can you do if issues arise with a power of attorney after it's too late to make changes? For example, if the original copy is needed but unavailable and the person can no longer sign a new one due to cognitive decline.
Well, that's the problem. That's a real problem. And people think a power of attorney is a simple document and it's going to be okay when it happens. So the first thing I say is you need a power of attorney. You need to carefully think through the assignment of those people in the power of attorney, as well as the conditions within that power of attorney. And you need to review that on a regular basis, if not on a yearly basis. And then the piece that I'm going to add that is controversial or could be controversial because I don't know of any people suggesting the same is to activate them. So I'm going to be very clear. My kids are part of my power of attorney jointly and severally with my wife, and my power of attorney has been activated when my financial institution. So people will say, are you crazy? Your kids have access to everything. They could transact on anything. Yes, they can. Will they? Probably not, or hopefully not. Do I trust them? Absolutely, because I built that trust. And some people say to me, well, you're crazy. Well, I say, if something happens in the hospital tomorrow, you trust them to take over your affairs. So why don't you trust them today? So you either have a trust building issue or relationship issue, or you selected the wrong person and you need to fix either of those. Okay. So bottom line is, I think the power of attorney is not a once in a lifetime event. It's something that you need to manage proactively and care proactively. Otherwise, you risk being in a situation that you just described in your question. So my question is, don't wait, manage proactively.
And then the next question asks, how do you suggest initiating the conversation with aging parents about parting away with their belongings so that they're prepared to transition to a residence where they will have proper care?
Oh, there's no magic solution to deal with hoarders. I think, again, it depends on their personalities. There are people that are extreme and hoarders and care about their belongings. In my book and in my life, I've adopted a philosophy that I step back and I look at assets and belongings around us, and anything that we haven't used in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, pick a number. I kind of step back. Why do we have that? And why don't I go and find someone that appreciate those assets, especially if I care so much about them? Because the reality is, and we've probably all lived through, is no one wants your junk. Kids don't want their parents' junk, and that's what they say. But if you feel strong about something, go and find someone that will appreciate your affairs. And I could tell you piles of stories. I have not done a whole lot, but from my old vinyl LPs to my electric train that have been sitting there doing nothing. My wife said, just trash them. I said, no, I'm going to find someone who will appreciate them for the same reason I've not given them up yet. and I have. And through that process, I ended up meeting some really neat people, learning about the state of electric train in this modern world. The new generation wants computerized things, but your old residents want, the old retirees want the old trains because they're comfortable and there's no electronics with them. So what I'm going to suggest is, first, get on the mission to deplete and encourage your parents, and then try to make it fun and a fun process so that they feel that the hard work for which allowed them to acquire those goods sees a new owner. And yes, it's not always easy to find some specific interested parties, certain things, but you got to start somewhere.
Thank you, Marc. And I think we have time for one more question. So the question is, from your experience, what do you believe is the most challenging aspect of the executor duties that executors need help with?
Oh, I'm not sure I am the best qualified person, because I haven't gone through enough executions myself. And I've been focused on the living years and how to make sure that continuity happens over the living years. I think I'm gonna guess. Okay, there's two aspects because of everything I've read. I think the one aspect is, if you don't have alignment with the families or the stakeholders in the will. I heard so many stories of family rifts, of disagreement, of get this done faster, or so on and so forth. So I think it could be even in the families that are believed to be the most behaved and most aligned. I hear stories. So I think that could be a big challenge, and it takes time, and people don't realize how much time it takes to go through an execution process. I think the other challenge for an executor could be the complexity. I'm a big advocate to simplify, even though for the longest time I wanted my affairs in different financial institution. It's easier for your own advisors to manage if it's all in one place, and it's easier to manage for your own self and your estate if it's not, if it's in different place. I'm going to tell you, I went in the last 2 years ago, I went through my mom's execution or liquidation of the estate. It was my first time, I guess, as an official executor. It was the simplest. I'm going to tell you, not only I have the philosophy, but because I've been involved and we had moved in from home to residence to, there was literally only an RSP, a TFSA, a bank account, and I can't think if there was anything else. It took 9 months. And it was little things like the crossover of the year end for the transfer of the RSP and how the minimum payment was going to be dealt with. And that particular bank made it more complex than it needed to be. So don't underestimate the complexity. So what can you do about it? Simplify as much as you can, deplete as much as you can before that moment. Do it for your family, for the heirs, for the executor. For me, an important value is not to burden other people. So that's why I'm a big on simplifying things and depleting and consolidating as much as possible, and including foreign properties, because one thing that may not be known is that your power of attorney in Ontario may not apply in Florida if you're a condo, and will shorten your process. Your will in Ontario will shorten the process if you have a cottage in Quebec. You should have a specific will in Quebec to deal with that if you want to free up that cottage and that asset earlier than the Ontario process will take you. So there's a whole bunch of complexity that people don't appreciate. So again, simplifying, consolidating as much as possible ahead of time, and communicating and aligning are a basic principle to stand by.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone who submitted your questions today. Charles, I'd like to pass it back to you for some closing remarks.
Well, let me draw our session to a close, and I'll just begin by saying, Mark, a big thank you to you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. And Paula, thank you to you for being such a gracious master of ceremonies and handling the questions and all the work you do behind the scenes to make these events possible. And then finally, thanks to everyone who joined us for the last 90 minutes. We hope you found this informative, and we appreciate your interest and support. So what happens now? Well, first of all, the recording from our webinar will be posted on the Compassionate Ottawa website as soon as possible, and we'll send a note to you to let you know when it's ready. We'll also send you a 3-minute digital survey to give you an opportunity to give us some feedback on your experience today. And then finally, as I mentioned at the outset, Compassionate Ottawa is a registered charity, and donations allow us to continue to offer programs like this one. So we invite you to donate on the Canada Helps website or on our own website, and we'll send you the link in the same email as the recording and the survey. So with that, let me draw things to a conclusion, and thank you once again to all for joining us this morning. The meeting is adjourned.